you had a wonderful debate, Professor Zhang, with Francis Fukuyama, which I just had the chance to read from 14 years ago. And as you told me, you're right, you won the debate. But the idea of Professor Fukuyama already back in the early 1990s was that the West had triumphed and it was the end of history. And my basic understanding of the reality is something different. And that is that with the end of the Cold War, the world had triumphed in the sense that we had the chance to escape from nuclear war and from confrontation, and we had the chance for rapid economic development in all parts of the world, which China led and China exemplified. So from the 40 years from 1980 to 2020, China experienced the fastest economic development in world history for a large country. And it showed what's possible in our world today because of technology, education, infrastructure, how big an advance can be made. And I watched this, by the way, with my own eyes personally, because my first visit to China was 1981. And so China was not a rich country in 1981. China was very poor in 1981 because of the history of the previous 150 years. And over that 40-year period, which is the period of my professional life, China experienced this rapid development. And my view is that's what's possible in all parts of the world. So while I completely hail China's accomplishment and know that it draws on deep roots of China's history and civilization, I do believe it's something that all regions of the world can accomplish. Maybe not at the same speed, maybe not with all the same success as China, but I do not write off any part of the world, Africa or India or South Asia or Central Asia or Latin America, this idea that we could all live in peace, in mutual prosperity, with rapid economic development in poor countries. Fortunately, this was not the idea of the United States at the end of 1991, when Professor Fukuyama declared the end of history. The idea was that the Western world would lead the world from now onward, and especially the United States within the Western world would lead the world onward. Whether other regions developed or not was of modest interest, but if they did develop, they needed to develop under the wing of the United States. In other words, what was important at the end of the Cold War was dominance, not cooperation or peace. And this is why I think the world has remained and become more and more dangerous over the last 35 years. So to my understanding, we have a mindset problem. And the mindset problem is that the Western world dominated the world economy and world politics and finance for about 250 years, roughly from 1750 to roughly the year 2000. And during that period, the ideology in the Western world explained that dominance as an inherent, rightful feature of the world. And it explained that dominance in a number of different ways, some very extreme, some a little bit less extreme, because there were theories of racial superiority, there were theories of social superiority, there were theories of cultural superiority, there were theories of religious superiority, that this was a Christian world after all. But whichever theory one subscribed to, there were theories of genetic superiority, biological superiority. Whichever view one took, the idea was deeply embedded in the mores, the stories, the beliefs, the institutions, and the politics of the Western world. And two countries dominated most of all, and most of the world's problems today can be traced to them, actually. One was Britain, and China had quite an interesting experience with Britain, starting from 1793 up through probably the end of World War II. And the other has been the United States, which is a successor to Britain in both the Western world and the Anglo-Saxon world. So the British definitely had an arrogance of power, and they used that arrogance of power in China, in India, in Russia, in every part of the world, because the belief was that Britain was the empire on which the sun never set. This was the era of Pax Britannica, although it wasn't so peaceful, but it was the era of British dominance. And the 19th century was really defined by British dominance internationally. Europe experienced two disastrous civil wars in the first half of the 20th century, which we call World War I and World War II, but in Europe, they were really civil wars within European countries. And at the end, Britain was no longer able to maintain a global empire, but the United States took over at that point. And the U.S. inherited the mindset and the institutions of British imperial rule. The main geopolitical institution of British imperial rule was to control the regimes of different parts of the world. So Britain mastered what we call regime change operations. If you don't like a government, replace it. It's a different kind of foreign policy from diplomacy. In diplomacy, if you don't like a government, sit down and negotiate. If you're British in the 19th century and you don't like a government, threaten it, kill the person, the ruler, or overthrow it. And this was the main mode of British action. In the second half of the 20th century, the United States took over that method of operation. Indeed, the British taught it to the Americans, I would say. And in 1953, we did a joint venture together, the British and the Americans, the British MI6, the spy agency, and the CIA, to overthrow the government of Iran, which brings us to our current situation. Iran had a functioning democratic government in 1953, led by Prime Minister Mossadegh. He had a very radical idea. Mossadegh's idea in 1953 was that the oil that was under the ground actually belonged to the Iranians, where the British knew that it belonged to the British. So when the Iranian prime minister, democratically elected, said, "This is our oil, it's under our ground," the British government knew that it had to overthrow him. And it connected with the U.S. government, and they made a secret operation to overthrow Mossadegh and to install the Shah of Iran, a Pahlavi dynasty, and to make a police state under U.S. control. If you add up all such regime change operations by the United States, between 1945 and 1989, at the end of the Cold War, one scholar, Lindsay O'Rourke, in an excellent book in 2017 called Covert Regime Change, and she was a student of John Mearsheimer at the time, she counted 64 covert regime change operations by the United States, mostly CIA-led, and 6 overt regime change operations, meaning an open war to topple another government. So 70 regime change operations. This is a very distinct kind of statecraft. It is the opposite of diplomacy. You don't have to deal with the other side. You have to control it or overthrow it, kill it, assassinate the leader, make a coup, fix an election, buy an election, create unrest to topple a regime. Ideology played no concern because during the Cultural Revolution period, which was not exactly American ideology, this is when the relationship was formed between Mao and Nixon. Then came the opening, and that was an opportunity for investment and trade. That's fine. But ideology played no special role. Starting around 2010, the American leaders that were watching this said, oh, China's getting awfully big and rather successful. And then I think 2 announcements by China really opened up American eyes. One was the Belt and Road Initiative, which was suddenly an economic, financial, infrastructure initiative that had suddenly 100 partner countries, and the U.S. didn't have anything like that. And then the Made in China 2025 program, which was a really brilliant initiative of China to identify 10 major technology areas and set policies to make a major advance in these areas. And this is one of the most successful industrial policies I know of in history, the Made in China 2025, because it really worked. It really produced the EV revolution. It really produced the digital revolution here. It really produced the renewable energy revolution. So it was very successful, but it terrified the Americans suddenly. So starting around 2015, the whole view changed almost suddenly in the United States. The view went from economic partnership to the need to contain China, the need to do something to slow down China's economic advance. Okay, all of this is quite dumb in my view. You don't get ahead in this world by stopping someone else, and there's no reason to. You're not going to be better off. You're not going to be safe. It's just a lose-lose proposition if it's successful, and it probably wouldn't be successful in any event. It started under Obama, by the way. It didn't start with Trump. It started definitely under Obama. And the Trans-Pacific Partnership idea, which was the dumbest idea of trade policy that I know of, which was to make an Asian trade system without China. How can you do that? China's the main trade country for all of Asia, but the United States had the idea, we'll make an Asian trade system without China. This is only in America could you have such delusions. In any event, it started with Obama. It continued with Trump. And it also implicates Taiwan issue, of course. This is the most dangerous flashpoint of all, maybe the most dangerous in the whole world, because the American politicians, because of this mindset, do not know how to stay out of China's internal issues. And so rather than saying, that's not our problem, you settle this peacefully, but it's not our issue, the United States, of course, is providing large flows of armaments to Taiwan. And the American political leaders are talking openly about defending Taiwan and militarily defending Taiwan. If China said we're going to militarily defend the state of Missouri, or we're going to militarily defend Texas, or we're going to militarily defend California, it would not play very well in the U.S. But the U.S., because of the imperial mentality, cannot put itself in China's position or doesn't care to, because the U.S. can determine what should be done. So just to conclude, I view this issue as extremely dangerous. And peace actually depends on the good sense of the Taiwanese leaders, which is fragile. Because if a Taiwanese president were to declare independence, all hell could break out. Because the United States would not necessarily have any responsibility. And this is why the situation is so dangerous. And if Taiwan were smart, and my feeling is Taiwan could end up like Ukraine, destroyed in between two fighting giants. And if Taiwan were smart, the first thing they should say is to the United States, don't send us any weapons, please. We don't want a fight here. We'll handle our own diplomacy across the Taiwan Straits. Please, quote, don't defend us, because we don't want to end up like Ukraine, caught between two giant powers. So I'll conclude here for our discussion to say that the world really is dangerous right now because of this mindset, on the one hand, that I've described in the U.S., and at the same time because of changing reality. I want to end on an optimistic note. If we can avoid conflict because of the technological revolution, we really could have a world of shared prosperity. And other regions of the world that seem hopeless right now, like African countries, could really have 40 years of economic development if they would follow China's roadmap for how to do this. And they would end up as a high-income continent alongside the rest of the world. So I'm actually basically optimistic. Worried, but optimistic. Thank you.